We've done the worst Latin name, we've done the worst Latin name again, but we haven't done the worst common name yet. So I've gathered 32 animals which are going to face off bracket style so we can determine what is the worst animal name. Unfortunately, we do start with the 1 versus 16 seed, or 32 in this case. The first matchup is the yellow-bellied sapsucker versus the humuhumunukunukuapua'a. Both pretty strong. In general, I'm not going to be too overly analytical, but we have two broad categories, aptness and insult. And the yellow-bellied sapsucker is a perfectly apt name. Its belly is yellow and it drinks sap. There's also nothing explicitly insulting about the name. It's just that yellow-bellied is a term for a coward, and a sucker is someone who's easy to take advantage of. And I feel like I've heard sapsucker used as an insult, but anecdotal evidence is the death of scientific rigor. The humuhumunukunukuapua'a, or reef triggerfish, is the state fish of Hawaii, and thus its name isn't entirely in Hawaiian. It translates to something like hog-nosed triggerfish. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure that fits. Its mouth here is not a nose, and it doesn't even look that much like a pig. But also, once you translate it into English, it's just a normal name. I think the yellow-bellied sapsucker has to take this one. Next up, we have the peacock mantis shrimp versus the spermophile ground squirrels. The peacock mantis shrimp is named after 3 animals, and it is none of them. Although them not being shrimp is pedantic, the argument is that the clade Caridia is what's called true shrimp, but that's hard to justify when the ghost shrimp, boxer shrimp, and prawns exist. Are prawns shrimp? In my mind, a shrimp is really any decapod that isn't a lobster or a crab, though I suppose that's a moot point since mantis shrimps aren't even decapods, but they still have shrimp in the name. So however mistaken they are now, someone considered it a shrimp in the past. Still, having 2 incorrect names is something. Spermophile ground squirrels, the name meaning seed lover, sounds wholly inappropriate. However, spermophilus is kind of the Latin name, not the common name. That doesn't really help them much because the other common name is suslik. This is from Russian, which is likely a mimicry of the distinctive chirping sound they make, or at least derived from the word for whistling, which may not reflect the same sound. Overall, the peacock mantis shrimp has 2 out of 3 bad names, and the spermophile has 2 out of 2. I've got to give them the points. Next up is the brown booby versus the hairy stone crab. Contrary to popular belief, if you search up booby, you have to scroll down pretty far before they stop showing you birds. The brown booby might not resemble the blue-footed booby you're likely more familiar with, but it has the distinctive booby traits, namely the eye position and beak shape, as well as the tinge of blue on the bill and the feet to a lesser extent. I think people are a bit too quick to mock this bird. I mean, yeah, booby sounds like booby, but when was the last time you had to refer to just one booby? And since I'm not talking about the bird in the plural, I guess it doesn't get that boost. The hairy stone crab, not being a mammal, lacks hair. It is also neither a true crab nor a stone, but more importantly, hairy stones can kind of sound like balls. I'll admit, this one's not really the best, but I came up with it all on my own, so I'm proud of it. Alright, fine, I'll move on the booby. Next up is the pillbug / roly-poly / woodlouse / doodlebug / potato bug / sow bug / woodbug / the list just keeps going on. And it's up against the bony-eared assfish. This is a translation of the Greek name, well, a mistranslation because this is supposed to be a kind of fish, but they made it a donkey. The bony ears refer to the ridges sticking out of its head. To be frank, I don't feel like it contributes much. What we have here is a clear matchup of quality versus quantity. Every possible word that can be placed before bug to refer to a creature that is not an insect. Now, is it a bug? See video for details, but mostly yes, so I'm gonna give it to the assfish. Next up is the pimpled lumpsucker versus the naked mole rat. Pimpled refers to the pattern of spots, and lumpsuckers are a much broader category of fish native to the Arctic. In the name, the lumps aren't really what they're sucking. They have pelvic fins that can stick like a suction cup, and they have lumps all over their body. Lumpfish is another name. The naked mole rat is naked, which is not entirely unique as only humans wear clothes, but they are mostly bald. Once again, they haven't had the extremely lazy name of just 2 other animals lumped together. They definitely aren't moles, they're rodents, but they could be rats, seeing as how rats are kind of scattered all over the rodents, and also moles are pretty heavily paraphyletic, so they could be those too. Now, I'm not convinced that the pimpled lumpsucker is well known enough that its common name is like common. Most results primarily use the scientific name. It obviously wins this matchup, but I'm just going to try to slow its roll. Next up is the dick sissel versus the fancy rat. Neither of these are that deep. Dick sissel is an imitation of the bird's call. There will probably be more of those, and I just thought fancy rat was funny. I read it, and I thought that someone was just like being a little eccentric, but it turns out it actually is called the fancy rat, and I still remember the moment I found it out, and besides, the dick sissel's not winning the bracket. Next up, we have the common cockchafer versus the bin chicken. This last one is a bit of a pejorative used to refer to the Australian white ibis. It's basically the equivalent of trash panda. Not only is it not a chicken, it also doesn't even really look like one, But let's not beat around the bush. The cockchafer is winning this one. It's called the cockchafer. Chafer is an old-timey word for a beetle, and it's named after the rooster for some reason, and it all just comes together so well. And next up is the no-see-em versus the daddy longlegs. No-see-ems are called that because they're so small that you no see 'em. If you name this insect nowadays, you'd have to call it a no-see-they-them. People ruin the word daddy, and now the daddy longlegs has to pay for it. It feels so weird to say it in a scientific context, so I try to use harvestman when I can. It's close between these two, but I'm gonna give it to the daddy longlegs just because it's a more monumental bad name. Next up is the kakapo. Again, imitative of the bird's cry, it's easily confused with a breed of dog called the cockapoo, which in turn is confused with another bird called the cockatoo. But none of that really matters because in this matchup, it is against the fluffy back tit babbler. Next up, we have the penis worm versus the peacock. Now, the idea of these names is pretty similar, which makes it pretty easy to say the penis worm is worse. Plus, people mostly say peafowl to refer to the species in general. After that comes the great tit versus the sarcastic fringe head. In terms of birds named after breasts, the tit certainly has the edge over the booby, but it's also a lot more common in birds' names like the titmouse and the aforementioned tit babbler. It's very simple, dare I say elegant. The sarcastic fringe head is a lot more intense. It shows up on these lists of insane animal names just because it doesn't really sound like something that can refer to an animal, although sarcasm is originally from the Greek for biting or tearing away flesh, same as sarcophagus. Fringe head refers to the little flaps on its necks. To be honest, I'm not terribly impressed with the sarcastic fringe head, but I also think the great tit is just too plain in this company to win. Next up is the bare-faced go-away bird versus the mountain chicken. The go-away bird is named after, you guessed it, the distinctive sound it makes. Although that's not exactly distinctive, you can pretty much skew any bird song into any phrase if you listen to it enough. The bare face is a reference to how it has a white body and a black face, so it must be covering everything else. The specific epithet means masked and insinuates the exact opposite. The mountain chicken is a frog. It does live in the mountains of Dominica and also Montserrat, which may be where it got the name, but Montserrat is named after the Montserrat in Catalonia, or perhaps the Virgin of Montserrat, which is named after a monastery in you get the point. Just move the bird on. Next up, we have the gooey duck versus the rock ptarmigan. That's not a typo. It's called the gooey duck, spelled geoduck, and is not related to the words duck or the prefix geo. It's derived from a Lashootsian word for the clam, which is pronounced geoduck anyways. The ptarmigan is not pronounced with a P. Its name comes from a Scottish word that's not pronounced with a P. It is spelled with a P because sometimes Greek words start with a PT. Between the two awful spellings, at least ptarmigan is consistent with English. Gooey duck is just the worst. A real heater of a matchup, we have the American woodcock versus the dick. Not going to spend too much time on this one. What I'll say is that there are a lot of birds with stupid names and mammals are more unique. After that, we have the blobfish versus the wild turkey. The blobfish is really the center of a very unfortunate cultural phenomenon where it's known almost entirely for its desecrated, bloated corpse and that guy from the comics. I know if aliens dragged humans out into outer space and then called us eye bulgers, I'd be a bit mad. But the turkey is also a misnomer. In fact, in almost every language, it is named after India, Turkey, Ethiopia, France, Guinea, or Peru, of which turkeys are native to none. And the blobfish also feels a bit bad to joke about, so the turkey moves on. Last matchup in the first round, we have the uncertain versus AEECL's sportive lemur. AEECL is the European Academy for the Study of the Conservation of Lemurs, but in French, the lemur's common name has an acronym. It's unheard of. It's also called the Anthophia sportive lemur, but Anthophia is such an irrelevant part of Madagascar that it always corrects to Antifa. The uncertain is called that because it's often confused with two other members of its genus, H. ambigua and H. blanda, so ambiguous, uncertain, and bland. That's not what these words strictly mean in Latin, but it looks nice. But this is about common names, no Latin names allowed, so I'm gonna move on the Antifa lemur. On to the next round, no more lengthy etymologies, yellow-bellied sapsucker versus the suslick. This is tough. I think I have to go with the yellow-bellied sapsucker. If we were closer to the susmi, it might have warranted more thought. Brown booby versus bony-eared assfish. I mean, boobies are nice and all, but I prefer the bones. No pause, and also the fish has two things working for it, while brown is just like a color. The pimpled lumpsucker versus the fancy rat. Okay, I like fancy rat, but it's not beating the lumpsucker. Common cockchafer versus daddy longlegs. I think it's the weakness of chafer, which is not really a word I use all that often, even to chafe in general. So I'm gonna pick the underdog and go daddy longlegs. The fluffy back tit babbler. Yeah, just move it on. Sorry, penis worm. The sarcastic fringe head versus the bare-faced go-away bird. Like I mentioned, the sarcastic fringe head really doesn't feel all that interesting to me, so I'll take the bird, and the fringe head can take the go-away. Next up is gooey duck versus dick. I think we have too many that are just a funny word, and also just look at the gooey duck. It's a clam that's too fat to fit in its own shell. Show me Gooey Duck. Now we have the turkey versus the Antifa lemur. It's Pride Month, and turkey is pretty homophobic, so go Antifa, we love what you're doing. Back to the yellow-bellied sapsucker versus the bony-eared assfish. Again, I think it's the thing that sapsucker has two bad names, the fish only has one. Pimpled lumpsucker versus daddy longlegs is close. I think what clinches it for me is that pimpled lumpsucker really is just called by its Latin name, but you have to say daddy longlegs because they're common, and nobody will know what you mean if you say harvestman. Fluffy back tit babbler is unstoppable. I don't even know what to say. You see that? You see what it means? Fluffy back tit babbler? Gooey Duck versus the Antifa lemur. This is a really good matchup, but I feel like I want to give the edge to Gooey Duck. If it was straight up the Antifa lemur, it would have more of an edge, but as it stands, it's the Antafia lemur. Now, I think this has to be the end of the road for Daddy Longlegs. It's kinky, it's weird, but it ain't beating the yellow-bellied sapsucker. That's like what the Confederates called the Union to goad them out to battle. Fluffy back tit babbler versus Gooey Duck. I really don't know what to pick here. Tit Babbler is freaking awesome, but Gooey Duck is just so wrong. It's not Geo, it's not Duck, and it's certainly not Geoduck, but then why is it? But I don't think it can win this one. Tit Babbler just has too much momentum. And finally, we have the yellow-bellied sapsucker versus the fluffy-back Tit Babbler. A real star strike. I went into this thinking the sapsucker could win, but I have to vote for the villain and let the Tit Babbler win. Say hello to the worst common name. Capybara? Capybara! Coconut doggy! Hey, I got a Glock in my Rari. Hey, 17 shots, no 38.